Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
When your own father looks you in the eye, after you've swallowed every ounce of pride you had left just to ask for help, and tells you, deadpan, we all have to suffer sometimes, something inside you doesn't just break. It detaches, floats away. Like whatever string had been tethering your heart to this family finally snapped, leaving behind that weird hollow feeling in your chest, the kind you get after the air's been sucked out of the room, but everyone's pretending nothing just happened. Let me set the scene. I'm sitting in my car outside the pharmacy, parked crooked because I had to stop halfway through turning the wheel when I realized I couldn't afford the damn meds. Not even the generic ones. The copay had jumped again, and I'd already maxed out the little emergency fund I'd put together after my divorce. I hadn't told anyone because I'm not the kind of person who asks for things. Especially not from my family. That was always Lily's job. Lily, my younger sister, with the silk blonde hair and the smile that makes people assume she's sweet even when she's tearing someone to shreds. She's charming in that shiny way, like a Christmas ornament you find in a store window, polished, decorative, a little hollow inside. I used to envy her, then I pitied her, now I'm not even sure I feel anything at all. Except maybe rage. Anyway, I called him. My dad. Leonard. Retired Air Force colonel turned real estate mogul. A man who built his reputation on discipline, self-reliance, and ironically, family values. He was always the kind of guy who treated emotions like weeds, something to be yanked out before it spread. So asking him for help felt like walking into a lion's den with a raw steak strapped to your chest. But I was out of options, and when pain starts gnawing at your joints like a pack of wolves, pride doesn't mean much. I kept it simple. Dad, I need help covering my medication this month. It's more than I expected. I didn't go into details about the flare-up, or the 2 nights I'd barely slept because the swelling in my hands was so bad I couldn't turn the doorknob to the bathroom. I didn't tell him that I'd skipped 2 doses already. I figured he'd understand the urgency without a dramatics-filled pitch. There was a pause on the other end. Then a sigh. Not a worried one, but the kind you give when you're annoyed someone interrupted your dinner. You know, sweetheart, he said, and I already knew something awful was coming. He only ever called me sweetheart when he was about to condescend. We all have to suffer sometimes. Builds character. I know you're strong enough to figure it out on your own. I think I sat there for a full minute before I said anything. I might have smiled. The kind of smile you give when you realize the joke's been on you for decades. Then I just said, sure. Thanks anyway, and hung up. I didn't cry. That was the strange part. Not because it didn't hurt, God, it did, but because I think something inside me was already past hurting. I was somewhere else entirely. I was tired, and I was angry, and I was quietly, sharply done. 2 days later, Lily posted pictures from some mountain resort that looked like it belonged on the cover of a travel magazine. Snow-dusted chalets, gold-trimmed spa menus, something about a crystal detox wrap, and private chefs. Switzerland. First class. #healing energy. The caption read, so grateful for this gift from the world's best dad. You always know exactly what I need. Love you. And there it was. Like a punch right in the throat. While I was rationing pills and eating crackers for dinner to save cash, my little sister was getting pampered in the Alps on my father's dime. And not just pampered, celebrated. For what exactly? Getting tired from Pilates? I didn't comment. I didn't like the post. I didn't call her, and I sure as hell didn't call him. I just sat there staring at the screen until the photo blurred into pixels, and then I turned my phone off completely. Silence, I decided, was going to be my answer. At least for now. But the silence wasn't empty. It was loud. Sharp-edged. I could feel it building into something, I didn't know what yet, but it wasn't going to be nothing. I had spent my whole life swallowing injustice like aspirin, quickly, with no water, hoping it would hurt less going down. This time, I let it sit on my tongue. Bitter as hell. Funny how betrayal doesn't always come with some dramatic twist. Sometimes it's just quiet. Casual. Shrugged off like lint on a jacket. That's what made it worse. He hadn't even thought twice about it. And now, here's where I'll ask you something. Have you ever realized too late that your family sees you as the one who can take the hit? That somehow, you became the default punching bag, the one who's expected to smile through it and say, I understand, even when it's slowly killing you. If you've been there, I want to know. Tell me. Because I'm starting to think there are more of us out there than we realize. I didn't go to work the next day. I called out sick, technically not a lie, and stayed in bed with a notebook and my laptop. Not to cry, not to wallow, but to start something. I wasn't sure what yet, but it wasn't going to end with me taking this lying down. Because if my father wanted to teach me how to suffer, maybe it was time he learned what it felt like to lose the one person who never asked him for a damn thing until she really needed it. And maybe, just maybe, he'd get what was coming. Or maybe he wouldn't. Either way, I was done playing nice. It's a strange kind of ache that sets in when you finally see your life through someone else's lens, or, in my case, through the perfectly filtered Instagram story of your younger sister being massaged by two women in white robes while your hands are too swollen to even squeeze the cap off a child-proof bottle of off-brand ibuprofen. There was a time, not too long ago, when I would have scrolled past her pictures with mild irritation or that old, tired guilt that every oldest sibling carries like a second skin, guilt that maybe I wasn't nice enough, patient enough, or simply didn't try hard enough to be the bigger person when it really counted. But that time had come and gone, and now, as I lay on my side because my back was flaring again, staring at the screen while my sister floated on some lavender-scented cloud of serenity high in the Alps, I felt something settle deep in my gut that I hadn't let myself feel fully before. Disgust. Not just with her. Not just with him. But with myself. For pretending this family was something it never was. I should have seen it coming, of course. It wasn't the first time. The favoritism wasn't new. I just never thought it would become so obvious, so bold, so cruel. Growing up, Lily could do no wrong, and when she did, when she snuck out with boys, wrecked mom's car, failed that entire semester at community college, it was swept aside with that familiar, infuriating phrase, she's just finding herself. Meanwhile, if I raised my voice even once, if I pushed back, if I got a B instead of an A, I was told to be an example. You're the strong one, they'd say, like it was a compliment, like being the designated survivor of the family meant I should be grateful for being ignored. And for a while, I played that role with pride. I worked 2 jobs through college, never asked for help, kept my head down, and did what I was supposed to do. I married a man who turned out to be a liar and a cheater, left him without fanfare, rebuilt my life from scratch, and told no one how close I came to unraveling when the bank account hit zero and I had to sell my engagement ring just to cover the gas bill. I never asked them for anything. Not a loan. Not a visit. Not even a, how are you holding up? I didn't ask for help because I already knew the answer. They were busy worrying about Lily's yoga certification and her latest Etsy shop meltdown because the vibe of the packaging didn't match her brand. So yes, I was angry, but it wasn't the kind of anger that screams and throws things. It was the kind that simmers, low and steady, until it becomes part of your bloodstream. That kind of anger doesn't go away. It becomes a guide. A fuel. And that week, I began feeding it with every subtle little reminder of just how wide the chasm had grown between us. My sister's spa photos weren't just pictures, they were proof. Proof that in this family, pain had a price tag and only some of us were allowed to escape it. I went to the pharmacy again 3 days later, hoping maybe I'd find a coupon, a discount, something, anything. But the price hadn't changed, and the pharmacist, who knew me by name at this point, gave me that same soft, pitying look as he handed me a bottle of over-the-counter painkillers and a printout with websites for financial assistance. I thanked him, pretended not to notice the way he avoided eye contact, and walked out into the afternoon sun feeling like a woman halfway buried under the weight of someone else's comfort. That night, I found myself scrolling through our family group chat, something I usually avoided because it was 90% Lily sending photos of her juice cleanses or my dad sharing blurry golf selfies with men whose names I couldn't remember. I hadn't said a word in that thread in over 2 months, and no one had noticed. But now there were pictures of Lily in a white robe, holding champagne, surrounded by mountains, smiling so wide it made my skin crawl. My father had replied with, "You deserve it, princess. Enjoy every second. Life is short." And that was the moment something inside me finally gave up trying to rationalize any of it. That line, "Life is short," hit me like a slap across the face. Because yes, life is short. Especially when you're trying to manage a chronic illness without the medication you need. Especially when you're stretching every dollar just to keep the lights on and still waking up every morning with pain that makes you question whether getting out of bed is worth the effort. It was short, all right. But apparently only some of us were allowed to enjoy it. I didn't reply to the chat. I didn't send a sarcastic gif or a snide comment. I did something worse. I clicked on Lily's contact and typed a message. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Her response came within 30 seconds, too eager. "Of course. What's up?" I waited another minute, then typed, "Did Dad pay for your trip?" There was a pause. Longer this time. Then, well, he gifted it to me. Said I deserved a break. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. Then, without replying, I deleted the entire conversation. That was the moment I realized I didn't want to fight with them anymore. Fighting implied we were still in the same ring, still following the same rules. But we weren't. We never had been. They lived in a different world, one where love was conditional and help was a luxury item, not a lifeline. And I had been left outside the gate so long, I'd started believing the fence was my fault. But now the rules had changed. I went to the kitchen, poured myself the last of the boxed wine I'd been rationing since my birthday, and sat at the table with a legal pad and a pen. I didn't write a letter. I didn't draft a list of grievances. I wrote questions. Questions I had let go unanswered for years. Why did they always make me the strong one if it meant I'd be alone? Why was Lily allowed to fail and still be praised? Why was suffering only noble when I was the one enduring it? And finally, the question I couldn't stop circling back to, what would they do if I disappeared from their lives entirely? No scene. No warning. Just silence. I went to bed that night not with answers, but with the comforting knowledge that I didn't need them yet. I had something better. I had time. I had distance. And more importantly, I had leverage. They just didn't know it yet. Because if they thought I was going to be the quiet one forever, they hadn't been paying attention. But I had. And I was done being invisible. It's funny how silence can make people nervous, especially the kind of people who are used to being forgiven before they even realize they've done something wrong. In the past, if I ever pulled away, even a little, there would be a flurry of texts, a concerned call or two, maybe a guilt-laced voicemail about how I was making things difficult or misunderstanding everyone's intentions. But this time was different. I hadn't spoken to either of them in over a week, not a text, not a call, not even a passive-aggressive like on one of Lily's nauseating social media posts, and that silence must have echoed louder than I imagined, because late Thursday afternoon, just as the sun was starting to dip behind the chain of tired-looking trees behind my apartment, I got a message from my dad. It was short, almost clipped, like he was trying not to show concern, but couldn't quite help himself. "Want to come over for dinner? Lily's back. Would be nice to see you." No question mark, no warmth, just a statement that sounded more like an order than an invitation. The part of me that had spent 4 decades chasing his approval felt the familiar tug to respond, to agree, to smooth it all over like I always had. But the other part, the part that had grown tired of being the designated adult in a family of overgrown children, just stared at the screen and felt nothing. Still, I went. Not because I wanted to make peace, and certainly not because I missed them, but because something in me had shifted since that call outside the pharmacy. I wasn't walking into that house as the apologetic older sister or the daughter desperate to be noticed. I was walking in as a woman taking mental notes, collecting evidence, soaking in every crack and creak in a house built on decades of favoritism and quiet cruelty. And I wanted to look them both in the eye while I did it. My father's house hadn't changed. The same stiff beige carpeting, the same couch that looked expensive but felt like sitting on a marble slab, the same pretentious oil paintings he bought at charity auctions to feel cultured. Lily was already there, of course, barefoot and bronzed, wrapped in a cream-colored cardigan that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She hugged me like we were best friends, like the last 2 weeks hadn't happened, like I hadn't just caught her floating through a luxury wellness retreat funded by the same man who told me to suck it up and suffer. I let her hug me, let my arms rest just heavy enough at her back that she could feel the dead weight of it. Then I pulled away and smiled, a tight little grin that probably looked more like a threat than anything else. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and pretended not to. That was always her gift, pretending. She had a master's degree in selective empathy, knew exactly how to make herself look like the wounded party while stepping over the bodies of the people she drained dry. Dinner was some catered thing he'd passed off as homemade, salmon with lemon cream sauce, grilled asparagus, a quinoa salad that no one touched, and the conversation felt rehearsed, like they'd planned it ahead of time. My father leaned back in his chair, wine glass tilted just so, and asked about my work, my apartment, my little health stuff, as he called it, like the inflammation that made it painful to tie my own shoes some mornings was just a mild inconvenience, like a stubbed toe or a paper cut. I answered politely, calmly, with the same detachment I used with difficult clients, the kind that keeps them talking just long enough to get what I need. Lily chirped in about the spa, how transformative it had been, how she'd had a breakthrough during a sound bath, how one of the nutritionists told her she had restorative energy. I almost laughed into my wine glass. Restorative energy? She hadn't restored a damn thing in her life. Everything she touched either got handed to her or quietly crumbled under the weight of her negligence, and yet somehow, she always emerged untouched, as if life itself bent around her like she had some unspoken arrangement with the universe. At one point, my dad turned to me and said, "You know, you could really use something like that. You work too hard. Always have. But you don't let anyone help you. You've got too much pride, kiddo." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he believed it. He genuinely thought he was offering insight, as if my pride was the reason I hadn't gotten help, not his refusal, not his blatant disregard, not the fact that when I finally did ask, he treated me like a beggar instead of a daughter. And Lily, nodding along like she was in on some big philosophical truth, added, "Yeah, you've always been so independent. It's kind of your thing, you know." My thing. Like a personality quirk. Like a costume I put on just for the fun of it. I didn't argue. Didn't raise my voice or bring up the Switzerland trip or the prescription I still hadn't filled. I just smiled again, wider this time, and said, "You're right. I guess some people just get used to not expecting much." That's when it happened. My dad flinched. Just a flicker, a barely there movement of his jaw, the way his fingers tightened slightly on the stem of his glass. He knew. Maybe not the full extent of what he'd done, maybe not the weight of all the years I'd swallowed his favoritism like it was gospel, but he knew I wasn't just talking about pride or independence or whatever neat little narrative he'd constructed in his head. After dessert, I excused myself to the bathroom. But instead of going, I stepped into the guest room, my old room once upon a time, and slipped a tiny voice recorder from my purse, one of those pen-shaped digital ones you can get online for under $30. I'd charged it that morning, tested it twice. I tucked it into the ceramic flower arrangement on the vanity in the guest bath, right between the fake lilies and the dusty rose petals. The battery would last 8 hours. The microphone could pick up a whisper through a closed door. All I had to do was walk out, smile, and wait. Because they would talk. They always did. They'd talk about me once I left, dissect my tone, mock my choices, congratulate themselves for trying. And this time, I'd hear every word. I said my goodbyes with practiced warmth, kissed Lily's cheek, hugged my dad a little longer than necessary just to let him believe, for a second, that he still had access to the version of me who needed his approval. Then I drove home in silence, windows down, the recorder's second twin in my glove box, still running, just in case. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with the recording. Not yet. But I knew this. I was done waiting for an apology that would never come. And this time, I wasn't going to be the only one who had to live with the consequences. There's a kind of pleasure that tastes metallic, almost clinical, like holding an ice cube in your mouth too long until your tongue goes numb, and it's the kind you only feel when you stop pretending you're not angry and start realizing you're finally, irreversibly in control. That was me the next morning, sitting at my kitchen table in a fleece robe with a coffee cup that hadn't seen a dishwasher cycle in a week, listening through my earbuds to the soft tinny hum of my father's voice echoing from the hidden recorder I had left behind in his bathroom like a dirty little secret wrapped in plastic petals. The sound quality wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. I could hear them clear enough. It started with the clink of dishes, the kind of gentle domestic noise that's supposed to mean comfort and love but, in this house, always meant performance. Lily's voice was the first to really come into focus, sweet and vaguely concerned, in that faux therapist tone she'd started adopting after her last breakup with the guy who was too emotionally stunted to match her frequency. Which probably meant he'd stopped validating her 3 times a day. "She's intense," she said. Like, I don't mean she's angry, but there's a lot of energy there, right? Like she's carrying stuff she won't talk about. And honestly, it's starting to feel a little toxic. I didn't pause the recording. I didn't rewind it or second-guess what I heard. I just sipped my coffee slowly and kept listening, even when I felt that old lump trying to rise in my throat, the one I used to swallow back during holidays when I got socks and Lily got a bracelet with a birthstone. My father's reply was quieter, rougher, like he had leaned in or lowered his voice, as if the truth could only be shared in low frequencies. "I worry about her sometimes," he said. "She's always been different. Harder. She carries grudges like armor. Maybe if she let people in a little more, she wouldn't feel so alone. She chooses isolation, you know? Then blames everyone else for not reaching out." That was the moment I felt the last fraying thread of guilt burn itself to ash. Because for years, I'd blamed myself too. I thought maybe I was too cold, too distant, too independent, too proud. I wondered if my pain made me less lovable, if the sheer effort it took to wake up and function meant I'd alienated everyone who once cared. But now, hearing them cast me as the bitter loner, when they were the ones who had shut doors and drawn lines in invisible ink, I realized that their version of me had nothing to do with who I was. It was just easier to call me difficult than admit they'd abandoned me. Later that afternoon, I sent a small file, an edited snippet of the recording, 32 seconds long, to someone I hadn't spoken to in over 6 years, a former college friend turned local journalist who ran a podcast about family dysfunction, toxic inheritance, and the myth of unconditional love. I didn't give her the full context, just a taste. A few lines, a brief intro, and a burner email. I didn't care what she did with it exactly, only that someone else heard what I'd been choking on for years. That somewhere, outside the curated bubbles of golf courses and scented spa rooms, the truth was floating, waiting to be heard by someone with no skin in the game. And then it happened, faster than I thought it would. The next day, the podcast teaser dropped. New episode coming soon, a daughter records a father and sister discussing her emotional isolation. But who's really being left out? I hadn't expected it to gain traction, but by noon, there were already 100 comments, mostly women, mostly older, sharing stories that sounded so familiar it made my jaw tighten. "This is my sister and my dad too. I was the invisible daughter. I asked for help once and never again." The thread grew. A wave started. I didn't reply, didn't claim ownership, but I watched every word like it was medicine I'd needed for years and was only now learning how to swallow. That night, Lily called. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again. And again. On the 4th call, I finally answered, not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I wanted her to hear mine. "What the hell did you do?" she hissed, and already I could tell she wasn't calling from a place of hurt. She was calling from a place of panic. Something about being exposed, even vaguely, had shaken her. "Dad's pissed. His phone hasn't stopped ringing. You crossed a line." I laughed. Not loud. Not cruel. Just enough to make her stop talking. "Which line was that, Lily?" I said, calmly, with a precision that surprised even me. "The one where I ask for help and get told to suffer? Or the one where you float off to Switzerland while I skip medication and listen to the two of you diagnose my personality over dinner like I'm some experiment you've been forced to endure?" She sputtered something, denial, maybe, or an attempt at gaslighting, but I didn't wait to decode it. I told her the truth, that I had nothing left to lose, and that silence was no longer my currency. That I'd spent too many years believing I was the broken one when really, I was just the one who saw things clearly and refused to keep pretending. Then I hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. But the next day, my father showed up at my apartment. No warning. No text. Just a knock on the door at 8:30 in the morning, like he expected I'd still be waiting for him, like nothing had changed. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went beyond age. But I didn't invite him in. He stood there, jacket in hand, lips tight like he'd practiced a speech and realized too late he'd forgotten the first line. He said my name like it tasted strange, like he wasn't sure it belonged to me anymore. "I think we need to talk," he said, voice low, not demanding now but unsure. And for a moment, I just looked at him. At this man who once taught me how to tie my shoes and later made me feel like needing him was a moral failing. At this father who could give luxury and comfort to one daughter, while offering the other life lessons and hardship wrapped in moral superiority. I thought about slamming the door. I thought about letting him in and tearing into him until his carefully constructed idea of who he was collapsed under the weight of my words. But I did neither. I stepped aside, just slightly, and said, "Then talk." And he did. But it wasn't what I expected. Not yet. Because some truths don't explode, they erode. And I was just getting started. It was strange, almost surreal, how quiet the apartment felt in that moment, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would unfold between a man who once tucked me in with bedtime stories about bravery and strength, and the woman I had become, standing barefoot on a hardwood floor, no longer willing to be anyone's moral lesson in resilience. My father stood just inside the doorway, looking smaller than I remembered, not physically, no. He was still the towering figure he'd always been, both in stature and in presence, but something in the way he held himself now, something in the way his shoulders drooped slightly and his hands fidgeted with the inside of his coat pocket, made him look like a man who had finally run out of reasons to believe in his own authority. He didn't speak right away, and I didn't offer him a chair or coffee or even the kind of forced politeness that usually bubbles up when you're raised to be a good daughter. Instead, I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, not out of defiance, but because if I didn't brace myself somehow, I wasn't sure whether I'd erupt in fury or collapse under the exhaustion of it all. When he finally did speak, his voice was lower than I'd ever heard it, not commanding or dismissive or coded in that usual paternal detachment that made you feel like you were part of a performance review instead of a conversation. "I listened to it," he said simply, and for a moment I wasn't sure what he meant, but then I realized. He was talking about the audio. The recording. The ugly, unfiltered truth of what he and Lily had said behind my back, caught on a cheap device and now circulating quietly in corners of the internet that still believed daughters should be heard. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He cleared his throat, that nervous gesture I'd only ever seen once before, the day he gave the eulogy at my mother's funeral and forgot the last paragraph of his speech. Standing there with the note cards trembling in his grip while I sat in the front row watching the strongest man I'd ever known suddenly look like a child lost in a sea of polite grief. This time, there were no note cards. Just him and me, and every unsaid word stacked between us like furniture no one had bothered to move. "I didn't think you'd ever really ask for anything," he continued, his eyes scanning the apartment like he was searching for something safer to look at than my face. "You've always been the one who just handled it. You never needed much. You never asked for much." I thought I was respecting that. I laughed, one sharp exhale, dry and hollow and not even close to funny. "No," I said slowly, evenly, deliberately. "You weren't respecting anything. You were just comfortable with the idea that I could suffer quietly. That I'd clean up my own messes and carry everyone else's, and you'd never have to see the cost." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't let him. "I asked you for help once," I said, feeling the weight of the words as they finally found their way into air, solid and undeniable. "One time. And it wasn't for something frivolous or selfish or avoidable. It was for medication. For my health. For something that, quite literally, could mean the difference between managing this disease and letting it consume me. And you looked me in the eye and said we all have to suffer sometimes." He lowered his head then, and I saw it, just a flicker of emotion, like the first crack in a dam that's held back a flood for years. It wasn't guilt, exactly. Not yet. But it was something close. I didn't mean it the way it sounded, he muttered, which was, frankly, one of the most cowardly things anyone can say when confronted with the consequences of their own indifference. I think you did, I replied, my voice steady, my heart oddly calm. Because that's what you believe, isn't it? That suffering is noble. That pain builds character. But only when it happens to me. Lily gets comfort. Lily gets grace. Lily gets trips to Switzerland and spa retreats and unconditional support, no matter how little she's done to deserve it. I get platitudes and lectures about endurance. Why is that, Dad? Why was I always the one who had to earn your help? He didn't answer. Instead, his hands dropped to his sides, and for a long time, he just stood there, shoulders rising and falling as if the air around him had grown thick with a truth too heavy to exhale. Then, slowly, he looked up and I saw something shift in his face. A rawness I hadn't seen since the day they told us Mom was gone. A crack in the stone. I think I was harder on you, he said finally, because I thought you could take it. And because I didn't know how to love you without needing you to be stronger than everyone else. There it was. The confession. Not the apology I'd wanted, not the sweeping acknowledgement of years spent as the backup plan, the emotional janitor, the one always expected to understand and forgive and forget. But a confession nonetheless. And though it didn't heal anything, though it didn't erase the nights I'd gone without or the mornings I'd woken up wondering why I wasn't enough, it landed. It landed in a place I hadn't even realized was still tender. But I didn't let him off the hook. I was a kid, I said, my voice breaking just slightly at the edges. I wasn't supposed to carry everything. You made me into someone who didn't ask because you taught me asking would lead to disappointment. And the worst part is? I believed it. I still believe it. That's what you left me with. He nodded, eyes glassy now, and I realized he was on the verge of tears, not the kind that burst forth in apology or surrender, but the quiet kind. The kind that sneak up on men like him who were taught to mistake stoicism for strength and denial for dignity. He cried once when Mom died. Once. And I remember thinking even then that it wasn't for her, it was for himself. For the emptiness her absence created in his carefully ordered world. And now, as I stood watching him silently blink away the emotion that had taken far too long to surface, I wondered if these tears, too, were his and his alone. Not for me. Not for what he'd done. But for the shattering realization that he might have finally lost something he couldn't buy back. I didn't hug him. I didn't invite him to stay. I just said, I think we're done here, and walked him to the door. He paused before stepping out, looked at me like he wanted to say something else, maybe the right thing, maybe the true thing, but whatever it was, he swallowed it. Like he always did. And I let him go. I haven't answered their calls since, not his, not Lily's. I changed my number last week, deactivated the family chat, and started therapy with a woman who doesn't tell me to be grateful for the strength my suffering gave me. For once, I'm not waiting for someone to circle back and fix what they broke with silence or guilt or shallow apologies dressed up as wisdom. I'm just here. Healing in real time. And if you ask me whether I regret it, whether I wish I'd kept the peace, answered the phone, played nice, I'll tell you this. Sometimes, walking away isn't the hardest thing. It's the bravest.